My name's Ken Gonzales-Day, and I actually teach here at Scripps College, part of the Claremont colleges where I've been teaching since 1995. I was only 11 years old when I started. I teach photography and art theory, and part of my job is to help prepare students to be artists in this moment. I wrote a book on the history of lynching in California, in which I discovered that the majority of lynchings in California were Latinos. And so basically that was a whole series of projects I worked on, which you can find on my website. After that experience of finding so much racial hatred around the community I belong to and am a member of, right? I just was trying to figure out why in 1850, when California became a state, do they hate Mexicans so much? They don't even know what a Mexican is, really, you know, if you think about it. So you have this encounter, and then there's just all this anger and frustration, and of course a lot of it was around capital and property and, you know, things like that. But my experience was kind of coming out of that project was thinking I wanted to understand the history of race and racial formation better. I felt like I didn't understand it fully. And so the project, the oldest, sort of this piece here is from 2008, imagined by Lavater, who writes this book called, basically, on physiognomy, if you guys are familiar with that, the idea that your physical appearance could determine your character. And so this chair was set up so you could sit in it, and the light of a solar candle would make your silhouette on this piece of paper. And the artist would stand here and draw your silhouette. Pop quiz, and anybody gets a free drink if you can tell me what a solar candle is. 1783, what could it be? In the book shows this. No one had ever built this, so I took his design from his text, 1782, which I have a copy of, and took his instructions and had it built, basically. So it's the only one that I know of has ever been built. If you need to borrow it, it lives in my garage normally. So it's available. And it was called a sure and convenient machine for creating silhouettes, 1782. And so it was all designed for that. This was in the diagram. It took me some time to figure out what the solar candle was. With a little research, I discovered it's actually a polished piece of metal that you use, like, have you seen the Hobbits, where they use kind of a piece of metal and reflect the light? And if you've never done it, so when I had it built, we took a mirror and we actually made one and we did the reflection. And and I sat in this, actually somebody else sat in the chair and I drew it, and it makes the most beautiful line you've ever seen. Like, if you think about a shadow, the way that this is all messy and blurry, the line that you get is this absolutely crisp thing. And the concept was to draw from shade or shadow. So this is 40 years before the invention of the camera. This is the first camera, right? They had this idea, what if I could draw or create a drawing with shadow instead of with light? So they had it backwards. And in fact, they had it backwards in many ways, right? Their whole idea of human difference was also backwards. Their idea of morality was backwards. So it's an interesting moment, very similar to our own time, right? Where we have these different views of people creating systems that are very insular. So it begins here, moving a few decades later. We have this thing called colonialism and U.S. expansion. So out of the Enlightenment comes, I think, therefore I am. And from that, I think, therefore you are, right? It's the sort of natural outcome of that. And so what we have is the beginning exploration out to the various continents, islands, and the French, being French, couldn't help themselves. They came up with this, and I can never say it properly, the cephalometer. So the cephalometer is the machine you see here, which is designed to measure the head. So if the concept was we could take the silhouette and determine meaning from that, then how much better would it be if we had a head to measure? So, but how are we going to get all these heads? So as they sent out the ships, the French sent out these explorations, and you've heard of them going to Antarctica. You've probably seen or read narrative versions. If you've read Frankenstein, this idea of sort of exploration and discovery and the monstrous, right? And so for them, the monstrous was the racial other. And so their practice was to cast, not to collect heads, but to collect casts of heads. So they used plaster. Plaster is also the other sort of beginnings of photography. So when you think of plaster, you have to think of this desire to create an indexical relationship to the real, right? This notion of a real and that there's a representation. So they would travel around, they would cast people that they encountered, and they would send the cast back to Paris. They're currently on view in the Musée de l'Homme, where you can still. And so in this particular one, I drew my own head, a few years younger, before I had to wear glasses. and sort of in the mechanism that was used to sort of illustrate that idea. And then moving through, I guess.